inflation is the biggest story. We all know what happened to gas prices, food prices, other goods and services, airline tickets. You're absolutely right about that, Julia. But there are two kinds of inflation, broadly speaking. There's what's called cost push. This comes from the supply side. So that's what we had in 1974. That's what we had now, which is it's coming from higher commodity prices, higher energy prices, energy shortages, supply chain bottlenecks, higher input costs, a lot of other factors. So it's coming from the supply side. The other kind of inflation is called demand pull. This comes from consumers. This comes from individuals, and it's a psychological thing. People say, gee, I was thinking about buying a refrigerator. I better go out and buy it now because the price is going to go up. If I wait 3 months, it's going to cost me 10% more. So I'll go buy it now, or a new car, or anything, a suit, a dress, anything you want, go buy it now. Because the price is just going to go up. That's demand pull inflation. And then that plays out in terms of wages. People want to raise. I mean, we went through this in the late 70s. I was working at Citibank at the time. They used to just give us raises without even asking. They would just say, hey, we're going to raise your salary, whatever, $20,000 or whatever, because they knew people would quit or they were going to ask for it sooner or later. They were just trying to keep ahead of things. And that was true on, I was in New York at the time. I was on Madison Avenue, finance, anything you could think of.
We keep hearing that a recession is looming, but there still hasn't been an official announcement, even though early this summer the U.S. experienced 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. This information alone would normally dictate that the economy is in a recession, but much more goes into the decision. However, we can't deny that negative GDP growth matched with soaring inflation leaves most of us losing confidence in the economy. The resilient labor market has propped up the economy for some time, with the unemployment rate at 3.5% as of September 2022. This, along with strong household savings, has kept the economy going since people are still spending money. While we're not officially in a recession just yet, many experts feel that one will happen, but they just can't agree on when it will officially be announced. All of this uncertainty has sparked fears over what to expect in the coming months as households continue dealing with the rising cost of everyday items. Jim Rickards, author of best-selling book The New Great Depression and an investment advisor and economist, will look at what a recession means for most of us and what you can do to prepare yourself for what's to come. He points out the 2 different types of recession and goes on to explain the driving factors for each of them. He also goes on to succinctly debunk the fallacies surrounding the Fed having power to control the inflation, stating that the Fed doesn't have any power over supply chains, but can only control demand to some extent. Welcome to Savvy Economists. We would go straight into the interview and listen to Jim Rickards as he throws more light on the impending global crisis. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave your comments below. Enjoy.
So we don't have that yet. Right now, the demand pull inflation has not kicked in. The cost push inflation, and that's what you're seeing at the grocery store, and that's what you were describing, is there. It's what's driving inflation. The difference is the Fed has absolutely no direct power over the supply side. They don't. They don't drill for oil. They don't run farms. They don't, pilot ships. They don't drive trucks. They don't unload in the docks of the Port of Los Angeles. They don't do anything that could alleviate supply bottlenecks or supply chain bottlenecks. They can control the demand side, even though demand is not the problem. See, this is the point. They can control the demand side by raising interest rates and tightening money, but demand is not the problem. It's not where the inflation is coming from. But if you crush it enough, if you destroy enough demand, it will feed through in terms of lower prices, even with supply side constraints. And just to be a little blunt on the subject, people complain that gas prices went up, and they did. They went from $2.40 a gallon to $5 a gallon or more, depending on where you were. Well, $5 was the national average, according to AAA. Well, they came down a little bit in July and August, kind of not all the way back, but maybe closer to $4. All right, that's in the right direction. But the old saying, the cure for high oil prices is high oil prices. In other words, the price itself destroys demand. There's a recursive function or circularity to it. And, if you want to get the price of gas down, get unemployment up to 7% because people who aren't working aren't using any gas. It's not a question of having to pay $4 a gallon or $5 a gallon. If you just got fired and you're sitting home, you're not buying any gas or very little, and that'll bring the price down. So we are so the way it works is raise interest rates, tighten money, reduce the balance sheet, et cetera. Get unemployment up. It doesn't sound like a desirable goal, but that's what it takes, and that's what happened in 1982. Get unemployment high enough so people are buying hamburger instead of steak. They're buying, whatever's the least expensive thing on the shelf, day old bread instead of new bread, or they're not buying gasoline because they're not going to work, et cetera. That will bring prices down, but at a very high cost, which we just talked about, which is high unemployment and lower productivity. Meanwhile, the U.S. debt keeps going up. We haven't really talked about the debt issue, but so it starts to, that part of it looks like 1981. But if you throw in a global financial crisis, which I mentioned, but we haven't really drilled down on that, then it starts to look more like 2008. And it goes to my point about when prices get high enough, if it's coming from the supply side, not the demand side, if it's coming from the supply side, it destroys demand. People will say, let's say you're working and you are filling up your car with gas, and what used to be a $45 fill up is now a $90 fill up, which it is, or heaven help you if you have a Ford F-150 truck, because it's like a 150 is like $150. That's how much it costs to fill those things up. But demand is inelastic. Like I said, there was the unemployed person, hypothetically, who is home and not using gas. But if you're getting the gas, you need the gas. You got to get to work. You got to do your job. You got to take the kids to school, whatever it may be. Well, if you're spending double, that comes out of something else. Maybe you buy the gas because you have no choice, but then you're not going out for dinner. You're not going to a show. You're not going to a sporting event. You're not buying new clothes. You're not taking a vacation. You quit the club because you can't afford the dues. In other words, it comes out of something else. And that is a depressant on the economy. And that will very quickly be deflationary particularly when combined with tighter monetary policy, the Fed's reducing its balance sheet, raising interest rate. They're going to keep doing it. They told us that. Again, just all you have to do is believe them. It's not that hard to forecast. Now, Julie, I think this was your question. How does that tie into the debt discussion we just had? Well, debt is nominal. I mean, I focus on the difference between nominal and real, and a lot of people look at interest rates. They say interest rates are really low. Well, no, when you subtract inflation, they're actually real rates are negative, or they're not as or they're going up, but real rates are negative because you have to take out inflation. But debt is nominal. If I owe you $1, I owe you $1. It's interesting whether the dollar is worth less because of inflation or more because of deflation. That's important. But I owe you $1. That was the deal. And this is where deflation is pure poison when it comes to the debt to GDP ratio I described, because the national debt is, as I say, it's 31 trillion, but the real value of the debt goes up in deflation. When I do portfolio analysis for people, I always recommend a heavy slug of cash. And like, wow, why would I have cash? There's no yield. In a deflationary environment, cash can be your best performing asset, even if you get a low yield, because the real value is going up. Every dollar is worth more in terms of purchasing power in a deflationary environment. So deflation is good for creditors or savers up to a point, and I'll come back to that, but it's the worst possible world for debtors, because even if the nominal value of the debt is not going up a lot because interest rates are low, the real value of the debt is going up a lot because the value of the dollar is going up. So you owe more in real terms. Deflation is a central banker's worst nightmare. It's a Treasury Secretary's worst nightmare for the reason I just explained, which is, we have a bad enough debt problem as it is, but if the real value of the debt's going up because of deflation, then and you can't borrow your way out of it, or you're going to have to create inflation after creating deflation inadvertently. by destroying demand because they're worried about inflation, you may end up in a world where the deflation is so destructive because of the increase in the real value of the debt that you actually have to go create inflation. And that's exactly what happened in Weimar Germany in 1922. Now, one kind of last point on that, with regard to deflation, I said it favors creditors and hurts debtors because the real value of debt is going up, and the creditor's like, hey, I own this note and it's worth more. To a point, but the point, at what point does the debtor walk away? The debtor, what happens is the debtor defaults. So all of a sudden, so it starts out, deflation kicks in, real value of debt's going up, the creditor's happy, the debtor's in distress. But the debtor just says, hey, I'm going to default, file for bankruptcy, you'll sleep in tomorrow, it's on you. So all of a sudden, the burden goes from the debtor to the creditor because the debtor just said, I'm not paying. And the creditor has what? A bad debt. You got to write it off, shrink the balance sheet. Now you're the loser. So this is contagion. This is what contagion is. And interestingly, the mathematics are exactly the same as epidemiology. When COVID came along and everyone became an epidemiologist overnight, the first thing you realize it's about 20% cell biology and 80% math. But the mathematics of a viral spread are exactly the same as the mathematics of financial contagion. That's why they call it contagion. It works the same way. And so yeah, the debt's out of control. It's slowing growth. You can't earn your way out of it. You can't, there's no reason to default because you do print the money. The real burden gets higher as deflation kicks in. Debtors then default, it's back to the creditor. But assuming the U.S. doesn't default, the only way out for the U.S., the only way out is inflation.
The bottom line is that if you're feeling vulnerable to what a recession may mean for your financial security, it's worth adjusting your budget so that you can build a cushion to weather a job loss. If you have that safety net, you can face the future more confidently. What sort of safety nets do you have? We would like to know in the comment section. You may be helping someone else make a big decision as well.